All right, so Star Wars. This was a little piece of news that in the Star Wars world, I think had good conversation about, but wasn't as big as I think it should have been, with some interesting drops. So Daisy Ridley was in I can't remember the name of the film, but it premiered at Sundance. So she's been doing some interviews. It's been a while since we've seen her. Um, and she's interviewing with Rolling Stone, StarWarsNews.net, who does an amazing job, picks up on it and kind of reads into some of the stuff she's saying. She says quite a few things I think are really interesting. One is that she is open to coming back, and she says something along the lines of, the phone lines are open. I'm looking for employment or something, because she has not really worked a lot since Star Wars. I think she probably took a good break for a while, which makes sense. And I do think the backlash was big enough where some agents are like, we don't want to hire her. And I even think John Boyega had a hard time with that too for a little bit, but he has been lucky enough to get in some really good underground roles in some movies that are not being talked about enough. I mean, you and I talk about, was it Breaking, right? The title of the film. It was really,
Yeah.
really good. And then, obviously our boy, why can't I think of his name? I'm drawing a blank. Oscar Isaac, yeah, he's just stuck around with Disney. He's like, I'm not going anywhere. You keep me employed all day. But
I play the game.
she did some projects with Pedro Pascal, and she was talking about how she hasn't watched all of the new Star Wars stuff, but the stuff she has, she really loved. She was like, man, I'm standing next to the Mandalorian. It's really cool. And she's open to coming back, which is something that when episode 9 came out, all the actors were like, no. John Boyega has kind of stuck to his guns on that. He's like, I'm not coming back to Star Wars. And I think rightfully so. I think the idea of John Boyega always being a Jedi is didn't have as much ground as I think fans think it did. And could he have been a really cool Jedi and a great story? Yes. I think realistically, the thing that really tanked his story was episode 9. And if you look, John Boyega was written the same role back to back. I understand people didn't like how it was in The Last Jedi. He does the exact same plot line in episode 9. They're not really together, the three of them. They've made a big deal that they are. If you rewatch the original trilogy, guess who's rarely ever together? All three of them. But it's just it's just dumb. But one of the things she said, Daisy Ridley, going back here, that I think was really interesting is she kind of offhand said that the idea of Rey being no one was actually JJ's. That's what she said. And I think that's really interesting. And I think if that is true, and I don't think Daisy would lie, I don't think she's lying to save face, because I think JJ has gotten hit hard. I think he went from the golden boy in Hollywood to a hated boy in Hollywood very quickly. And Rise of Skywalker made a lot of money, but man, did it get, it is on the bottom of almost every fan's list. The Last Jedi will go anywhere from top 3 to bottom. Rise of Skywalker, I don't think I've met anyone who has it higher than 3. Bottom 3, excuse me. Force Awakens has been consistently, and I think in everybody's middle of the round to the higher end of the list, and I think that's rightfully so and fair. But the point she makes, if she's not lying, and she says that the original idea is that JJ wanted Rey to be no one. If she's not lying, that tells me that Kathy Kennedy and the execs at Lucasfilm had way more say in episode 9 than we fully believe. Because that to me screams studio decision. That they are reading the stuff that people are complaining about on Reddit and saying, nope, this is what these fans said. I read 5 tweets about it, so it must be true, instead of letting your filmmaker make a good film. And I think it's very, very interesting. Do you have any thoughts on that? On anything I've said so far?
It's not surprising to me if it is like studio decisions, but it also just shows that there wasn't a through line plan that they stuck with. I mean, it's kind of a hard dilemma because you want audiences would like the director, I think, to be able to, or the director or the writer, whoever is in charge, to have their own story be told, as long as it's the good one. But at the same time, if you are making a trilogy of movies that goes from one to another, there still needs to be some agreements to be had if you decide to do different um, directors in charge of each project. And unfortunately, they decided not to have that through line really go through by the sounds of it. And now, as we're looking back at the past, so it just kind of speaks to me as what we've been debating or theorizing is kind of true, that there just wasn't a through line plan, that JJ did have ideas to have Ray be no one, which I think it's more interesting than anything else. But then
She should have been the
whether
avatar of the Star Wars world.
whether it was because the studio decided to change that or whether it was because um, Ryan Johnson decided to change that, it just went to show that there just wasn't a through line plan or even the most basic of through line plans to be had, which, I like Last Jedi and I like The Force Awakens, but at the end of the day, there really wasn't a through line through it, and I wish that there kind of was, so that way there could have been a same page and a good, and at the very least, a good conclusion, at the
I'll tell
bare
you
minimum.
this. I'll die on this hill. The idea that we needed a plan from start to finish, I think is fair and also like a bad take at times. I'm not saying you're given a bad take, just hear me out. But where I'm getting this at is that you have two choices. You either hire someone like JJ to make 3 movies and creates 3 movies and a storyline. If you don't do that, you need a guy like Kevin Feige who can sit there and say, okay, or you come up with beats if you're going to do different directors and say, okay, each movie needs to go boom, boom, boom. You can do whatever else you want, but you need to hit these 3 beats, throughout your trilogy. Or option 3, which is what they started doing and backpedaled on. You get 3 directors, they get to go off whatever came before them, and you let them make their movie. That's what you do. You don't backpedal because of backlash, which I still, and honestly, if you disagree with this point, you're not paying attention, truly. The Last Jedi haters is such a more minimum than it is those who really love the movie. If you do disagree with that, you're not paying attention because I go out and I look for negative things all the time. I look for them and it's so hard to find them. It's very hard. I'll find some,
It's also
but
very healthy.
I am finding one for every dozen positive
Mhm.
things I see. And The Last Jedi randomly trends all the time on Twitter because people all the time are like, "Hey, remember when a bunch of people thought that everyone hated this movie and we really didn't?" Uh I get for the older generation, it's like that. You look at, Ian McGregor's in interviews talking about how he really hated when he made the prequels when it first came out because he would talk to fans and they would tell him how horrible his movie was. And then the kids grew up and were like, "Oh my God, I love your movie." And he's like, "Then the kids I made it for grew up." And that will happen with this next set of movies. But I do think when you look objectively, I think when those kids grow up and they look at it objectively, they can tell what's good and what's bad. All those kids that grew up that love the prequels love it for nostalgia, but it's still ranked, most of them, at the bottom of their lists for a
Yeah,
reason.
yeah,
And
and they're
the
still
the the
good within the
mistake
bad.
the mistake made sounds like because of this name drop that it was more on Kathy and the heads at Lucasfilm than it was on JJ. And I think that's probably pretty true. But I mean, these leaked scripts you hear about what Colin Trevorrow would have done, you read that and you go, "Hey, that makes a lot of sense. It's a cool story. Like, wow, everybody has a cool arc." And then you see what JJ did, and you're like, "Oh, he definitely took some from that script." Like, if this is true, and I believe it is true, I believe that Colin leaked that script on purpose to get save some face on how he was treated. Um, and it's a bummer. We haven't had a Star Wars movie since. And they were originally trying to pump out 2 a year like Marvel, and we haven't had one since. And it tells you that they really have hated how the Rise of Skywalker was treated. And Kathy got her contract renewed. And I think what saved her is Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni, who came in and said, "Put us in charge." And I think they have way more say. They're not ever going to be officially in charge of the studio, I don't think, like James Gunn. They might maybe one day, but she just re upped her contract. I think that she said, "I want to stick around. George entrusted this to me, which is true. He wouldn't have sold it if it wasn't for Kathy taking on the role because he loves Kathy. And Kathy has made some of the greatest movies, has been a part of greenlighting movies that a lot of execs said no to. But I think that she said, let me stay around. You guys have control. You tell me when I'm wrong. And then I think Dave Filoni was like, easy peasy. And then he does whatever he wants and he makes 800 shows. But it's very interesting that Daisy is open to coming back, that she is saving some JJ face and throwing some, I think, low key shots at the studio. And I think it's a very interesting conversation. But anyway, that's about all I have on it. But any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, I hope this reminds other directors, other studios to take another look at Daisy Ridley, see if they think she could fit in some projects, because I thought she did very well in those movies, and she deserves a career just as much as any of the other actors that are
She's an Oscar
involved with
caliber
these
actress.
movies. You think so?
Oh, absolutely. I think
Nice.
some of these Sundance movies that the Sundance movie she was in is apparently pretty good. So I hope it's
Cool.
I hope it gives her some, maybe not Oscar cred, but just like, oh, hey, she's back. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. In terms of Star Wars movies coming back, I don't want them to go with the 2-year plan. I'd rather just have one,
I don't either.
possibly every other year, every 2 years or so.
Every
It's
Christmas,
supposed
every
to
other
it's
Christmas.
a it does still need to feel special, and I think that's just a good way of doing it, is spacing out the time of it rather than cranking out so many. But that's just my opinion.
All right, guys, what do you think of everything we talked about today? Comment below, let us know. Like, subscribe, share. Episode 20 is back. The Movie Meals podcast, Patreon exclusive, blah blah blah, all that good things. And as always, thanks for watching, Mom.
See you guys.